Let me introduce you, Nigel. I think I have to start by welcoming everyone onto the call. Hopefully everyone is joining. But I have to say, Nigel, it feels very surreal for me to have this conversation. I remember when I was struggling back at Move Bubble, and I remember watching some of your videos, and I was just really, really inspired by you. I think you've achieved so much, and the more and more I've got to know you since being involved in Carmoola, you're someone that I really look up to, and I think I'm somebody that has come from a relatively humble background, and what you've achieved, I think, is phenomenal. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to Carmoola and everyone in the team. It's a real privilege. And I'm extremely grateful for you taking the time to speak with us. We've got people from all over the world. We've got people from Ukraine. There's people on here from Lviv, Kiev, and as well as Warsaw. I think that is people that have moved from Ukraine to continue their commitment with Carmoola as well. And Nigel, I think that I'll start by saying, we'd love to start by hearing like how life began for the Morris household. Like, I understand that your father was a sergeant in the army and you moved around a lot. I think I read somewhere that you went to 11 schools. But I'd love to kick off, and we'll try and theme this around culture, because Carmoola is very, very culture driven and values driven as an organization and as a company. But yeah, I'd love to hear from the beginning, really, like, what was life like for Nigel at the beginning, and then where did that interest in culture, but I would like to say like more broadly people, because I think what's really interesting about yourself is you studied psychology. I know you're very interested in human behavior, and we talked a lot about that in the past. So yeah, let's kick off there, and really excited to hear from you.
Thank you for having me along. I do really appreciate it. The irony is actually I'm here in London. But you folks are scattered around the planet. I would look forward to meeting you all face to face. So at some point, Aidan, when you do coagulate everybody together, have me come along, and I can meet people personally. And before I get into me, I do want to just spend a moment, because you and I did have a little email exchange. I think maybe it was yesterday. The days have blurred because I've been traveling. To say, look, and I'm seeing this phenomenon a little bit across the portfolio, but you're beating your numbers. And a year ago, candidly, everybody was not beating their numbers, was losing to their numbers. And last year was just for me anyway, probably the toughest year that I've ever had as an investor. I've been doing it for 16 years. I'm still learning. I'm still a neophyte, but it was really so much austerity and so much difficulty and so much challenge, and so many messages were around cut and reduce and wheel in and make things smaller. And the thing I love most in life is making things bigger, expanding, believing, challenging, imagining. And so last year was really tough. So it's nice to see a good deal of our portfolio companies with a little spring in their step, and to see Carmoola at the vanguard of that is fantastic. So hats off to all of you. I don't know how much of it is the market that's coming back or things that you're doing, but fortune favors the prepared mind, and the fact that you're taking advantage of it, I think, is fabulous. So hats off to you all for that. I wanted to mention that, and your big brother is watching. You should know that too. Okay. So look,
Is that Yusuf or you?
You absolutely Yusuf. I mean, I'm always sort of a little embarrassed going through all this background stuff, but I'll give you the pencil sketch on it. So Dad was in the army. His family was from South Wales. My mum was Welsh speaking from the north, from right in the middle of Snowdonia. I'll come back to that if you want, because my daughter's been here with me yesterday in London, and she was up in North Wales. And boy, if it rains here, by the way, it pours there, freaking torrential. And the weather just coming off the North Sea. But we bought the church in the village where my mum and dad are buried. And the church was falling to rack and ruin. The Church of Wales had basically deconsecrated it about 10 years ago. And if you leave a building in that part of the world for more than about 2 weeks, it starts to fall apart. So it was falling apart. It had vines up the side, water was gushing in, the kids had got underneath it. I thought somebody's going to have too many lagers and then light a fire and the thing will be torched. So we bought it, and we've just now got planning permission from all these. It's grade 2 listed, Snowdonia National Park, Cadwr, and it's and the Church of Wales. So we're just beginning. So I'm really kind of excited about that. But so Mum and Dad were Welsh. Dad was in the army, moved around all from Germany to 2 stints in Northern Ireland when just before the Troubles started. And I did go to 11 different schools. And it always seemed like my accent was the wrong one, and it always seemed like I was supporting the wrong team. So I'm a big Spurs fan. I'm going to go and see Tottenham tomorrow, beat Crystal Palace, hopefully. And I've had several flirtations of getting involved at Tottenham, but every time I do that, the deal never happens. And I just made an investment last year in Swansea City to sort of celebrate my Welshness and learn a little bit about football. And ever since I invested, they changed 2 managers and are now fighting a relegation fight. So I think I've cursed the Swans. So yeah, I moved around a lot. Dad was a Daily Mail reader. Dad, was a nationalist. Dad was a patriot. Dad was a royalist. And by the time I was about 12 or 13, I was bringing the Guardian home to annoy him, and we're pushing against that sort of authoritarian mindset. I don't think there was a book in the house. He was a non-commissioned officer. He was a very talented leader and a very talented athlete. But he really had this thing about people who were educated, and he was one of the men, and they were something else. He lived in a very bifurcated world. Look, when in my teens, I started to really get interested in philosophy and psychology. I don't really know why. When other people were, reading Viz comics, I was reading, Jung and Freud, and really just trying to understand how the world worked. I was really fascinated by it. And part of it, I think, Aidan, if I really go back, was because I was always an outsider in a way, wherever I went, because I was always the new kid. I always was trying to figure out how to fit in and how to make sense of who are these, what's the culture here? Who are these people? How can I fit in? How can I make sure I don't get the crap beaten out of me on the playground? And, should I be playing rugby or cricket or tennis or football? So I think I was very intentional about trying to figure those things out, partly for defense and partly for, to get along with people. And I think so psychology was my thing. And then I was going to study it at college, and I was going to go off to, for the longest time, I was going to be a clinical psychologist. That's what I wanted to do. I studied it undergrad. And by the end of the first year, and I never was a great student at high school. I think I was too distracted by trying to fit in, I think. But I realized that actually I was quite good as a student. And it really came from sort of like wow, I'm actually quite good at this. I never really realized. I worked damn hard, but it was a kind of an interesting epiphany. By the end of the first year, I was throwing the towel in on phenomenological psychology or Freud, Freud, and I'm saying all this is made up. There's no data to support it. Come on, where's the data that there really is an id and an ego and a superego, and there's an electro complex. So so you had some Viennese therapist in the 1800s, probably doing too much heroin, making all this stuff up. So I became
Nigel, just on that point, then, for me, it's something that I've never heard you answer really. But where did this love of data come from? Because it kind of followed you through your life from that point. Why? I've spoken to people in our team, and it's around, certain people in the team love data because it gives them control, or it gives them a level of certainty in an uncertain world, if you like. Is that what is driving that for you? Is that where it comes from, or have you ever thought about that?
That's a really deep question. Yeah. So I was having going back and forth with a dear friend of mine, a very smart man, whose political leanings are very different to mine. And I could, in that he consumes a lot of right-wing media. How about that as a word? And what I keep saying to him is, look, you can believe that there's a crisis on the border and immigrants are really bad, but you know what? And you hear these vignettes about, some person coming over from Venezuela who then commits this horrendous crime, and that's because Biden doesn't have control over the border. We hear that. I mean, the right-wing media is just replete with that story. And I said, look, but here's the data. There aren't, immigrants, first-generation immigrants, and I'm actually one of them in the US, are incarcerated at a rate of 70% of locals. So they're not being incarcerated more. They don't commit more crime, but the right-wing media loves to play up on this theme. So let's start with the facts. Let's not start with the interpretation or the subjectivity. Let's build on what we actually know. And you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And so I think this was very deep in me, emerging maybe in the dialectic of arguing with my dad. I don't know, but yeah, let's go to the facts first. Let's be empirical. And there are lots of different types of facts, and not all facts are created equal. But yeah, if it and at the end of this first year, to bring it back to that, if it can't be measured, it doesn't exist. So I found solace in experimental method and applied math and stats because it has an answer. And my little venture firm is called QED. And QED, for those of you know, is a quad erat demonstratum, and it's what that is proven. And that was always so important to me to really stop all this twaddle about philosophically debating something without standing on top of the science and the facts. Then you can put art on top of it. And so many people forget that bit, and so many people just get stuck in the facts. They don't start interpreting it. So the building of the Capital One model was, I always said, it was a combination of the amalgamation of two kind of philosophical themes. One was the experimental method and Karl Popper and stats and developing key hypotheses based on observation. And we'll come back to the need for that in an AI world if we have a chance, because AI can make us incredibly lazy about not developing hypotheses, and it can make us very lazy in not interpreting the world. So develop a hypothesis, test to actually attempt to disprove the hypothesis empirically. Naturally occurring experiments and real A/B testing goes a long way. That was a key, and in that, challenge everything. Challenge every conventional wisdom, because some of it is true and some of it ain't, and and where it is true, know the boundaries of where it's true. So that was theme. Just the second theme was the application of modern finance theory of net present value, and being able. And you and I talked a little bit about the theory of discount rates. I remember a year ago. So if you put experimental method and modern finance theory together, you actually have the two key pieces, I believe, in untying the complex Gordian knot of optimization, and that was at the core of the Capital One approach.
And Nigel, just going back a second, so like my understanding is that Cap One got spun out of an existing bank, and was like, how did you go for, like, how did that kind of happen? Was it your like intellectual, like, you guys are doing this wrong, I've seen the future? Because I think a lot of people forget how cutting edge it was at the time, because everyone always has this kind of new view of the world and we take it for granted now. But at the time, how was underwriting being done? How was the decisions being made? I'd love to just hear like that, and then your kind of driver for because I think you need to look at these things sometimes when we're looking into the new world with some of the latest technologies that we're all facing now. But it's interesting sometimes to hear your view around that.
Yeah, well, I mean, they were not de rigueur. The frameworks that we were kicking around in 1988, actually before many of you were born, were incredibly cutting edge and incredibly controversial. So So I come out of BC, I come out of undergrad. I bag being a clinical psychologist because I'm totally disillusioned. I find my way to business school. I know nothing about business. Didn't know a balance sheet. Didn't know a P&L. But was an okay student. Went to LBS because it was the best school in the UK. If I had my day again, Palo Alto would have sounded a lot better, but I probably wouldn't have got in. Came over and finished the MBA at Wharton in Philadelphia, and then joined a strategy consulting firm. It was a BCG spin-off called SPA, and the SPA has become Oliver Wyman, if any of you have ever heard of Oliver Wyman. And their mantra was, we're more BCG than BCG. So total quant shop, analytics, statistical modeling, big data, what became big data. And for me, I thought, I know absolutely nothing about business, but, I can hold my own in that quantitative world, so I'll be okay. And then I'll be able to go to school and figure out business. So Fairbank and I, Rich Fairbank, who still is the CEO at Capital One, and we formed the banking practice at SPA, and there were the two of us led it. I found actually interesting that Yusuf will get a kick out of this, that people would actually listen to me talk when I didn't know what the heck I was talking about, and I became, and I could sell business, and I thought, how can this be? You've never done anything, you don't actually know anything, but people will listen. So you're kind of a dangerous character roaming around. And the voice on my shoulder was always, the imposter syndrome of, you've got to, but it's about time you started to live up to your own, rhetoric. So we built the banking practice. It worked out really well. I learned about actuarial analysis and undressing actuaries in insurance and how that worked. And I went to school on banking for 4 years, working for Manny Hanny and Chase and Citi and the British banks, Barclays and Lloyds, and really learned about how banking works. And point number one here, and this is very crucial, is I saw what they were really good at, and I saw what they were bad at. And I wouldn't have had the audacity, the courage to go and build Capital One if I didn't see their foibles and how. So we're working for banks, and we had this vision of doing credit cards differently. Giant experimental laboratory, QED everything, analytics win, fact-based, let's use all this data, you're not using it, risk-based pricing, quantitative method, NPV, all that stuff that we chat about.
And credit, and I guess at this stage, credit cards were still relatively new concept. It wasn't it is now.
No, they weren't as ubiquitous. It was any color you like so long as it's black. 19.8 APR, $20 fee. Everybody had the same, and we're like, hold on, a 50-year-old person with a fantastic driving record, and somebody who's 19 who's got 4 drunk driving offenses and driving around in a red Lamborghini. You're going to charge different people different prices because it makes sense to do that. But nobody had ever adopted that, for example. And half of America, actually rather like now, can't get access to decently priced, transparent credit. So we thought that data could unlock all these kinds of segments and populations. Direct mail was emerging as the principal method of origination. Digital, of course, was yet to come. So look, we were selling this vision, and we went to all the big banks and said, look, this is the answer. We figured it out, And they either said, we're already doing it, which they weren't, although they were using some of the language, or it can't be done. And if it can be done, you two clowns can't do it, because what have you two ever done? So we found this little bank in Richmond, Virginia, who said, okay, come and do it. Now, this is a real Rubicon crossing moment, because you have total impunity as a consultant. I don't know how many of you are ex-consultants. And because if things don't work out, why is that? Well, it's because your client couldn't execute on your incredibly brilliant heuristic and alchemy that you had figured out. But it was a great moment, because for me, it was the chance to slay the dragon of, can I actually do it? And for the next 3-4 years, I totally immersed myself in how do you lead teams, how do you lead people, how do you lead people with different complexities, how do you get the tech and the product and the people and the analytics all to work together. And I had so many wonderful mentors. One of the things I think that distinguishes the way I've my journey is that I've been able to find amazing people that for some reason are willing to mentor me. and I am incredibly intentional about learning from them and being really totally annoying with asking loads and loads of questions. So I learned a terrific amount in that period. The Signet Bank then, we found that the credit card business became a massive juggernaut. It was killing all the economics. The return on equity was fantastic. And Signet said, look, we're a traditional regional bank in sleepy Richmond, Virginia. And you know what? What you've built is a direct mail analytical juggernaut. We need to spin you off because we're not getting the advantage of the separation of two different businesses. Call it conglomerate discount is what the bankers called it. So we spun off, and that was Capital One. That was 1994.
And Nigel, so like you and Richard, how deliberate were you about culture? Like and values? Like, did you talk about that? How did you kind of, did you see that as a way of scaling the business? Like, clearly data must have been core to one of those values, but how did you think about that? Like, how did you approach that?
Yeah. Look, we were very deliberate about a number of things. One was, look, we're going to hire the most brilliant analytical problem solvers, not necessarily PhDs in random forests, but people who have quantitative undergrad degrees and or MBAs. But you want people who just think analytically, who think in terms of quantitative problem solving, people who develop hypotheses. That was really key. And Yusuf, you ran the gauntlet of getting into to Capital One from UVA. A word, Yusuf, on the case. People would run through. We would test people out through case studies, and these weren't case studies like how many credit cards can you put on a football pitch, or why are manhole covers round, which are this was. We would set up a situation with numbers, and we say,
there's people in the team like Zer and Sam that runs some of the from the Cap One processes. We've seen how hard they are.
Yeah, they were hard, and I think I went through like 11 cases, one behavioral interview, one math test, and one random interview, basically. And the funny thing at UVA was some people went 8, and at interview number 9, they would be cut off after having passed 8 interviews. And the ironic thing, though, was that built a very strong brand for Capital One on the UVA campus. So the interview process actually appealed to some people, and those people said, I never knew about Capital One, but if they have this kind of rigor, I want to be in this team. And that's kind of how I felt back then.
But so we wanted that superb capability. I think there's some Stockholm syndrome in the process, by the way. If everyone knows what that is. So people became like, it became a rite of passage for the people who would ordinarily have gone to McKinsey or Goldman. So and that was very important that we could get positive selection in applicants. So we built that core. So back to culture. So but what you didn't, so that was at the core, and the people like Yusuf, who were much younger than the typical bank counterparts. And what we gave them was enormous kind of decisioning fulcrum capability because they were integrating credit risk and marketing and other things. But in terms of intentionality, we really didn't want people that were intellectual bullies or a-holes. We didn't want people who we wanted people who had ambition and verve and drive, courage. I've always been the supporter of the underdog. I always want the person who always been supportive of somebody who has clawed their way to where they are. Because you know what, when the going gets rough, and it does, nothing ever works out. We've had 200 companies, Aidan, over 16 years. 2 of them hit their numbers in the first 3 years. Maybe you'll be number 3, but there were 2 that did it. Because why? Because you make the numbers up, for goodness sake. Because people like me make you put numbers together that are absolute fantasies, and then we hold you accountable for them. It's a really weird mindset, right? Because you don't know. How the heck do you know? Because you're learning your way into a business. So it's about people who've got talent and the capacity to overcome difficulties. People who think in terms of decision trees, not people who think linearly. That's always been really critical. And then people who can who start with the facts and then challenge the facts and then build intuition and hypotheses and subjectivity on top of it. They're the people that we wanted. Now, in so many organizational cultures, there is a dominant function. I worked for IBM doing some work with them when I was a student, and the legal department was the number one. GE Capital, it was always the finance department. And in so many banks, it's actually is the people who manage the regulator is the structure. And what I always said was, look, as a CEO, I have to measure and curate and trade off lots of different risks. I've got financial risk, I've got compliance risk, I've got tech risk, I've got product risk, I've got customer don't like the business risk. I've got managing my board risk. I've got running out of money risk. And what I have to do is I have to trade them all off. And you, as functional experts, have got to help me optimize that algorithm. All too often in cultures, you have a dominant function who then says, you guys go off and figure out what you want to do and then come and ask me if you can do it. I want veto power. No function should have veto power. And that was a key part of it, because we saw banks, it was either the credit risk person or often the credit risk person kept saying no. And we said, look, we're going to test into different populations. We know that we will lose money in the test. It's okay, because it's called a test. And then if it doesn't work, we probably won't do it. But in the testing, we will learn. And in the testing, there may be, pockets of incredible value, and then we'll go off and exploit them. So learning and testing is a comparative advantage. In particularly bank, I remember working for one of the banks. This is when I was a consultant, and the tech department gave them a number of test cell budget. I thought that was the most funniest concept. So you can only do 4 tests this quarter. What are your top 4? I mean, come on. The whole point is that it's an expanding universe, and the more testing begets testing, and learning begets learning, and optimization begets optimization, and we're on a journey. So let's focus on the big picture there. I really believed in diversity of thinking, and one of the things that we find is that a lot of places. And I'm looking at all of you, and I'm seeing one common theme here. Not that you're all really devastatingly handsome, and with one or two exceptions, got fantastic heads of hair. But one of the things that we found is that we attracted, some Ivy League or comparative Ivy League, quantitatively oriented young white men, and it was a real challenge. Because I'm talking about diversity in terms of diversity of thinking and orthogonal skills and approaches that you bring to the table, particularly when you're marketing to populations that might be looking different to the way you look. Yeah. And that was a real challenge. And this is something I really reinforce with young companies. The time to set up diversity in the culture. This is diversity of thinking, and diversity in terms of gender and in terms of ethnicity follows diversity in thinking. Is do it right from the beginning.
Nigel, I'd love to dig in that a little bit more, because it's a challenge that we face. Like, for example, like we talk about this really quite regularly, not only being a car finance business, but also being a financial services business that's very data driven. It is extremely difficult, especially when you're trying to operate in a world where you want the very best people. Which is hard enough to find as it is. And then if you start layering on diversity on top of that, it's an extremely big challenge. Like, I would love to hear from how did you tackle that? Like, what are some real bits of advice that you can share that maybe you've learned from your other boards and other bits and pieces?
Yeah, well, yes, it is. It's really hard, and the easiest with you've got to change and tip the paradigm upside down. So how do you do it? Well, first of all, you can look for diversity with a big D in terms of ethnicity and gender in other functional areas. My experience is my younger daughter finished law school 2 years ago. She now works as a public defender in Los Angeles. But coming out of her graduating class at UCLA, it was 57% women, 43% men. So let's just take that area. You know, a lot of the best general counsels and legal departments are being run by women. Fantastic. There you go. So that gives you a little bit of diversity. A lot of the best HR people, a lot of the best operational people. So that you should do anyway, because that's better business, and that's not that hard. Now, when you go to the quantitative and the analytical, it's much harder because, you know, culturally, particularly women, have shied away, and African Americans certainly in the US have shied away from the quantitative, from the science and the quantitative subjects, and that means you're more challenged. What I found to be really effective is, one, state it as a goal, and then people will work backwards from it. Look to have the diverse people in your organization. Go and find other diverse people. The 0 to 1 is the hard bit, not 1 to 2. So once you start to get momentum, and you can point to really talented people of color or gender that are on your team and are excited, they will attract other people who look similarly. So look for Pied Pipers. Look for the people who can lead others. Computer science people, it's really tough to find the best women. But you know what? Those best women want to be in cultures that are not, you know, authoritarian and hierarchical. They want to be in cultures where they're going to be respected and equal. And so promoting that really makes a lot of sense. It's a long journey. And you won't solve it overnight. In fact, you'll never really solve it, because you'll never get to a point of a level of equilibrium that you'll feel comfortable talking to your wife about. But if you don't make a freaking huge effort as a management team, you will never dent it, and you will always be spotting yourself as an organization as a result of it.
We've got to do more there. Like, I think I think that's really useful. And so, Nigel, like, I know you've talked a lot about culture. How did you bring the customer into this? Because Carmoola is very, very customer centric, and we love to put the customer at the heart of everything that we do, and we try and deliver wow to them. But how did you bring that forward at Cap One, and how are you seeing it being done in other boards?
Well, you know, this is a space where I think that Capital One actually didn't do a great job. It's very, sometimes it's hard to, as an organization, to do more than one thing really well at a time. So most companies that are good at B2C can never pull off B2B. Most companies that are really, really analytical, you know, will struggle with doing a great job for the customer. A lot of companies that are fantastic at supporting customer don't really understand their unit economics. So I did a presentation at Money 2020 a few years back, and I invited a whole bunch of ex-Capital One execs, who I won't list out, but they were all very senior and had left Capital One. And the question I asked them is, you know, what did you learn from your Capital One experience? And we got a lot of hire talent, get people to work together, you know, be ambitious, challenge conventional wisdom. Got a lot of that, which is great. And I said, so what didn't Capital One do well that you've learned from? And there were three, and I can only remember two of them off the top of my head. But one of them was, don't always believe you're the smartest guys in the room. And there's a lot of groupthink at Capital One. Yusuf now gone off because he was blushing when I said that. So he's gone off video. But you know, look, aren't we all clever? Look how we're winning. Look how silly a Bank X is. And you know what? People are clever in different ways. And you've got so much to learn in the outside world. And when I left Capital One, I went, oh my goodness me, how many totally massively talented people there are that are talented in ways that I'm not, and that I can really learn from. So that was one. And the second one was I've always carried around, and it goes back to your point on customer, is that customers are not bundles of NPV. They're human beings. They're living carbon organisms. And you know what? You, as an analyst, as a strategy person, as a data scientist, as an engineer, you need to know who these customers are. And one of the things I did in the Capital One days, which got a lot of pushback, I would make people listen in on calls. So you had to log in every week. You had to log in for an hour and just listen to customer calls as a way of attempting to connect the analytical engine with a human being. Now, in a business like yours, it's hard to do that, but look for ways to do that, and look for ways for your team to be able to relate to the different populations that you're talking to. You should go do field trips to car dealerships. You should be figuring out ways that you can actually connect with who your customer base is in palpable and real and tangible ways. And I think that's critical. And then, of course, and I know that you do this, the Net Promoter Score number. I was joking the other day, I was giving a talk at KBW, the analyst group there in New York. And I said, look, ask your clients what their Net Promoter Score is. These are banks. And if they know it, will they tell you it? If they don't measure it, that's incredible. What gets measured gets done, right? Who was that? But that is so crucial. And it's not so much the absolute number, although, if you can get, I think the last Nubank number I saw was 91. 70s, 60s and 70s are solid. 80s is fantastic. 90s I've only ever seen very seldom. So, but one, the absolute number, but the relative number is really important and how it's moving. So even if you start with 11, if you go to 16 and then you go to 24 and then you go to 33, that's all right. But the banks don't measure it, and where they do, they don't disclose it. And where they do disclose it, if you look at it, they're flat as a pancake. So I totally subscribe to where you are, Aidan, and that is start with the customer. Are you solving their problem, and how do you know, and how do you relate to it?
Yeah, like we've just done some, or in the team has done some really interesting analytical work around building customer segmentation, utilizing a lot of data as well, which is quite interesting, but for another time. But yeah, like I think one of the big challenges with finance in general, it's very, and especially if you're very analytical about it, it's very easy to lose customers in what you are doing. Because you are looking at APRs, you're looking at all the data all the time. But I think it's really, really important to remember there is a human at the end of that has a problem, and you are ultimately helping them and serving them. I think it's really key.
I think it's very easy to hide behind the sort of surrogate analytical frameworks, like, well, look at the response rates are up, so they like it better. And they're not attriting as much, so aren't we doing a great job?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And so you left Capital One after achieving incredible results. Wasn't it something like 32% annual return over your year on year the whole time that you were there, which is just an unheard of kind of delivery. And you thought, I started doing some angel investing. Right, let's take this serious, and obviously. Is that effectively where QED came from? And I guess the question I really want to ask is, you are now a global investor, and for those that have read the benchmark case study on Acquired and various other bits and pieces, it's probably one of the hardest things to do is scaling venture capital, because it's very, very human dependent and partner dependent to do. I'd love to hear from you, like in terms of how you think about that, but also you've got a global team now. How do you manage culture? Because it's probably a very different challenge to what you faced at Capital One.
A lot of meaty thoughts in that question. But I will go back to just to reflect. That's just on Capital One, just to close that out. Last week I woke up in Mexico City on Monday morning last week to see that Capital One had just bought Discover, and I talked to Rich Fairbank, my partner at Capital One. And we sort of reflected nostalgically that in 1988 we were running around. Remember, we were the two clowns that nobody would bet on. And now, 36 years on from that idea, we now have the largest credit card company in the world. And you go like that, has a market cap of what the two of them together, like $70 billion.
Yeah.
and you go and the fifth or sixth largest bank in America now, the only bank that started from scratch in the last 100 years that's in the top 20. So, you know, I was just sort of reflecting on that with Rich and our journey. And it was kind of interesting. And the bookends of that humble, you know, start with just passion and energy and ambition and naivete to, you know, this juggernaut that has now been created. So that was fun to do. And to be been there in the first half of it was great. But Capital One started, and we did deliver what we called the double. And I often joke that, you know, Tottenham Hotspur, my team did the double last in 1960, 61 season. And since then, all these horrible teams like Man United and Arsenal and Man City and Chelsea, they've all done it. But one day before I drop off this mortal coil, hopefully Tottenham will win some silverware again. But yeah, so we set out the double was to do 20% growth rate in earnings and 20% return on equity. And we thought that was the right thing. And we did it 10 years in a row. But when I left Capital One, which was actually 20 years ago now, you know, I saw the growth slowing and I saw the ambition dissipating. And I saw we were incredibly successful and wonderful, and we were, you know, the bee's knees. But I was starting to learn less, and I felt like, what is it? There's a Steely Dan song called "Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am stuck in the middle with you." Do you know that song? I used to sing it all the time, but yeah. But and I felt like lawyers to the left of me, accountants to the right. Here I am with a script. Talking to people, talking to regulators, and talking to Moody's and S&P and securities analysts. And I'm like, I feel like I'm an actor, and I'm not into. I mean, life's too short. So I left. It was really hard to leave, because I left something that I had birthed and that I cared so much about. It was a child to me. And it was now an adolescent, so I felt that she could go her own way. But it was really hard. I mean. You know, people talk about, you know, divorces and things like that, and I've been lucky enough. My wife stuck with me now for 40 years, but it was really painful, and I'd probably like a divorce. I came back to the UK, and I thought I might be, because I wanted to detox from public company life. I didn't want to see people in Starbucks anymore saying, "Oh, Nigel, you know, I work in this," you know, like, you know, people would recognize me. So I wanted to just get away from it, and I thought I might be done. I was 45. I had been lucky enough financially. I didn't need the money, and I joined the board of The Economist and London Business School, who had both been instrumental in my thinking over the years. Brookings, the think tank in Washington, National Geographic, and then a behavioral economic think tank called Ideas 42 that I think you and I have talked about a bit. And I thought I might be done. And I did it. We moved the kids to the American school in North London, came here, lived in Kensington. And for a bit, I was sort of satiated. And then that voice in my head began, and my itch began. And I'm like, I can't do this. I don't want to be an advisor. I've got to get my hands on the steering wheel. I've got to build something. I went back to the US and hooked up with Frank Rotman, my partner. Frank and I worked together at Capital One. I hired him out of grad school, UVA as well, where Yusuf went, and he was chief risk officer at Capital One. And this is an important thing in the partnership. You know, it was Rich and I at Capital One. It's been Frank and I in the main at Signet at QED, and you know, looking for complementary nature of part of senior team is really important. You know, Frank gives me permission, because he is a negative problem solver, because he sees the fault in everything and every idea, and because he's more conservative than me. It allows me to be expansive and be imaginative and be creative and be extrovert, because I know that I've got him looking at the left-hand tail and making sure. And it's almost like I won't move my queen out from the back row. I keep my finger on it until I talk to Frank. Is my queen okay here, or is there some bishop that's going to take my queen, right? And that partnership is really powerful. And knowing that you have that, and we haven't touched on trust and loyalty and commitment. I mean, these are words that I think that actually may have come from my dad. But, you know, having people that you grow up with, that you go through thick and thin with, and that you care about deeply, not just as problem solvers and intellect and capability, but people that you care about deeply because of how they're, what kind of human being they are. And I've got that at QED, and it goes back to the culture. So Frank's been with me, I think, for over 30 years. Bill's been with me. I hired him out of undergrad 25 years ago. We separated a bit because he stayed at Capital One longer than I did. But these are people that have been around forever, and I love that. Now you worry about some groupthink sometimes. You worry about homogeneity in DNA, but to me, having that confidence that people are going to speak truth to power, and that they're going to tell you the truth, and they're going to be empirical, and that they have the same goal, and you're not playing politics or watching over your shoulder. Really important. So what about QED? So look, it's all about doing the right thing. I'm not interested in window dressing. I'm not interested in playing games. I will not tolerate politics. You start playing games and you should go somewhere else. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. I'm just not doing it here. You know, I had the chance with QED to make it in the image that I wanted to, and I think I've done a pretty solid job of that. We've hit escape velocity as a venture firm, which many don't, Aidan, because venture is made up of 3 bits. One, this is only ever talks about. People only talk about the first one. First bucket is, are you any good at it and do you like it? Right. So, you know, empirically, you can look at the number of X's and you can ask yourself, do you like it better than being an operator or working in a big company? So we ticked that box because we found Credit Karma and Klarna and Nubank and Remitly and a whole bunch of others. 28 unicorns, over 200 investments, now 4 billion under management. Do we like it? Yeah. I mean, I can't. It suits the way I think, and I can't think of it. I always joke. I say, if I find something better to do, I'm going to go and do it. Maybe I'll when I'm running Swansea football team, maybe I'll do something different. The second one, and this points to your question, is can you scale it? Because a genius model doesn't scale in venture capital like it doesn't in consulting. I mean, Frank and Yusuf, you know, are certifiably geniuses and slightly insane, but they can't manage 200 investments, and they can't get deep enough into the complexity of deal flow. And payments are different from lending, are different from wealth management, and different from crypto. And what you see in Lagos is different to what you see in Rio. So you have to build a culture that isn't built around a single-threaded genius. And that means you have to get a team that will work together. Everybody gets the same, gets carry from the same pool. Everybody gets carry, which means that Yusuf is supporting me and I'm supporting him. Really crucial. A lot of firms don't do that. And a lot of firms are not intentional about how to build culture and how to scale things because they build around the genius model. And the three geniuses that exist have become vertical stovepipes. And you're one of one of Sarah's team or one of Jack's team, and you don't work together. We passionately believe in geo arbitrage. A lot of the reasons why we were able to engage with you, Aidan, on Carmoola 2 years ago was because we knew auto finance in the US. Otherwise, we wouldn't have understood it, right? Well, how could we understand it? We knew dealer track, we knew these models. And the null hypothesis is that if it works in geography A, it'll work in geography B. Capital One went from the US to Canada, to the UK, to France, to Italy, to Spain, to South Africa. Because we tailored it, we had different payment rails, we had different regulatory architecture. But yes, you can do that. So threshold scale at QED is 1, geographic, 2, that we can go from early stage to late stage. We had 5 companies go public in 21, and I'm sitting on a public board at the moment. One of our companies called Remitly, who I love dearly. You saw Matt Oppenheimer talk at the CEO.
Yeah, I stole some of the insight from that to add to our board meeting. Actually, I now start a board meeting with a customer story. Yeah, which I really love. So yeah. Hope you don't mind, but
and he does it in the earnings call too. So he's training the securities analysts. So that's what he cares about. And it's really symbolic, but it's really powerful. And symbolism is really important in culture, right? We touched earlier on in board meetings for the companies where I am more influential. We start with the people section. Everybody in our world says, "Oh, people are our most important asset." Oh, God, I hate when they say that. And then you look at what they do, and they start with the numbers. So let's start with the attrition rate. Let's start with our Net Promoter Score. Let's start with who's left. Let's start with what the exit interviews are saying. How are our human beings feeling? Strategy is wonderful, but a strategy exists at a single point in time in a single place. A culture allows you to be able to morph and develop a strategy and to be able to execute it. The only sustainable thing is culture, and culture eats strategy for breakfast. I really believe it.
So interesting. Nigel, I would really love to give the guys an opportunity to ask any questions they have. But first, this is a selfish question really more than anything else. But I would love to hear, how do you see AI? It's obviously quite a hot topic. You guys must be talking about it a lot at QED. How do you see it impacting financial services? How do you see it impacting culture? I know that's a huge question. So
it's really I'll
talk about it for hours, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, 3 pithy points. One, it can assassinate servicing costs, particularly with human beings. Klarna just laid off 700 people. We've seen it with a company like Albert. If you want to, we can get you a visit to go and see Albert, how they have systematically deployed chat and AI to reduce expenses in servicing and improve quality. So it can be done, one, and we're going to see that. So, if I've got a big call center in the Philippines, I'm really worried about how AI is going to make a difference. One. Two, in the Capital One days, we talked about one-on-one marketing, but we couldn't do it because we were constrained by our ability to be able to execute on the tailoring. In an AI world, I can customize message at the individual level. That's incredibly powerful. That creates lift. It'll create CAC to fall, and it will benefit the people who are dexterous with AI. And it won't be the incumbents who are still going to be struggling with. They'll start with, oh, what's the regulation, and they'll start with that. That'll be the second thing. The third thing is, and this is a bit of a watch out, is don't get lazy with AI. I'm still a believer that start with thinking and problem solving and observation. Goes back to the things we talked about from 40 years ago. Start with that and then use AI as an advanced statistical technique, because that's all it is. If you can't see it in simple mean, medians, and modes, if you can't see it in simple stepwise linear regression, don't necessarily believe it exists. And if it does exist, it may only exist on a certain sample at a certain time. AI can make us really lazy. AI tells us we should do this. Well, why? Tell me what. You show me in an equation what the variables are. It's very hard to unravel that. So just be careful about taking over and dissipating the amount of thought in your culture.
Okay, no, that's super interesting. Thank you so much. Definitely be taking you up on that offer to see how some of those companies are removing, because it's very hot on our agenda at the moment. But yeah, I'd love to hand it over to the team and ask, is there anybody got any questions I'd love to ask Nigel? Come on, guys. Any questions? Sam, I'm sure you've got loads of questions about Cap One days that you would love to ask Nigel. You're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry. Bit on the spot.
Sorry.
So, it'd be really interesting to know what you think the biggest opportunities are and the biggest threats for the business.
Your business, Sam?
Yes, in terms of kind of wider environment and what should we be focusing on from a risk perspective?
Yeah, look, I'm somewhat of a bystander here, but look, I think the tipping point in my mind when we had our conversations 2 years ago, Aidan, was will we see this non-linear transformation of power from the dealer to the individual, and an individual armed with, weaponized with, I can outdo this transaction? Will that enable? Will that get through the power that the dealer has at the point of sale? And we hadn't seen it happen in the US, but Aidan, being the compelling entrepreneur that he is, convinced us that it was happening. And also and Dan Cobley, if you I remember talking to Dan a lot about this, because that was the key for me. That if you don't believe that, you can't believe in Carmoola in terms of TAM, total addressable market, how big it can be. So that was always a crucial one for me. And then for you, the biggest the biggest challenge. I think the biggest challenge is make sure you stay really focused. I mean, a lot of bright and shiny objects here in terms of capital markets that can really can really distract you from the core of how do I really deliver great experiences for individuals going through what is one of the most odious and difficult, but important decisions in their life. And how do you really do that? So, like just about every other company, Sam, the road even to hit where you are now, and you're still in this, in baseball terms, in your first or second innings. It's not been linear even so far, right? It's not gone exactly as you thought it would go, Aidan, and that's really important to make sure that you think in terms of if-then statements and decision trees, not linearly, and that you're anticipating different movements and changes. And the wind is going to start to come at your back, and you're going to feel that lift. You're going to feel interest rates come down. We're going to see inflation stabilize. We're going to see both debt and equity become more available. And if you get the tipping point in terms of the consumer behavior, which I think you can, we may be sitting here a year from now, and your challenge is going to be, how do I scale this to meet the demand? And that would be really, really, really terrific. So they're just some off-the-cuff thoughts, Sam. But I'm going to bring in. Yusuf. You're actually much closer than I am to things. Carmoola, what would you add?
Yeah, I think one key challenge will be combining all this sort of entrepreneurship, big picture strategy that is normal in a startup with like incredible precision and incredible cost focus. So you guys have the cost focus, so that's kind of why we invested. But adding to that precision, I remember in structured finance once we celebrated AAA spreads going from 7 bips to 6.5 bips, and that's how the fixed income world thinks. They think in basis points. In the VC world, we think in like 5x, which is 1x is 100%. So combining those two is the challenge, and I think this team has the DNA to do that. And then you get in the best of both worlds. And if you get the best of both worlds in lending, like Capital One got analytic thinking, strategy thinking combined with ABS power, then you can do this sort of 20x in 10 years that Capital One did.
Thanks, Yusuf. That's really, really useful. Has anyone else got any questions? Sorry, Sam, to put you on the spot there. Amy, Ollie, go for it.
I'll ask a question. Hi, Nigel. Thank you for that. That was really interesting. I head up risk and compliance here, and I was quite interested by some of the things you're talking about and the interaction between culture and things like conduct risk management and actually the operational risks that stem from that. Now, as we're building up our risk management framework, what I really want to know is how to sort of operationalize some of these things with proper KPIs, KRIs, BCIs, metrics that we can actually track so that we can see how our culture is progressing over time. Clearly, there are sort of bog standard ways of doing that where we're looking at just like people kind of data, attrition, sickness, etc., which gives some indication. But I wondered if there's anything else that you would do, maybe more on a qualitative basis or surveys, or what would you recommend so that we can really get a kind of grasp on what the culture is and how it's trending?
Yeah, two ideas that I've used in the past, Oliver. One is many of us, I don't know if you do it, we 360 ourselves as individuals, but we don't really 360 a function or a thing. We say at Carmoola that we are X. Are we really? And are we less, I mean, and on an absolute level, but on a relative basis, are we losing X? I mean, there's a natural kind of gravitational pull. As you get bigger, you become more institutionally oriented, become more hierarchical. If growth slows, you're not at that point yet. But if growth starts to slow, often people get sharper elbows. How do you manage that? And 360ing things and departments and functions and projects can allow you to get some sense of that. That'd be one. And you know, there's something quite anodyne about surveying digitally, but it can be useful, particularly if you're measuring the same thing time after time. But you know, having human beings do 360. So go find yourself a consultant and have that person go off and do 10 half-an-hour interviews. That to get the qualitative, then you can go to the quantitative. So I think about that, and using humans in the process. Good HR people are not administrators. Yes, they're telling you what the 409, you don't have 409As in the UK, what the stock option plan looks like. But you good HR people are watching and feeling the culture, right? They're sensing it. They're seeing it change and move. They're watching whether or not the pendulum overswings, whether or not you overcompensate. And something at QED, we got bashed up pretty badly in the EKG of boom and bust in fintech venture, and I wondered that we got too caught up in the hype and the ebullience of that, the radiance of it, and then when it crashed, I think I worry that we got too maudlin and defensive. So we overreacted to the external macro stimuli. And I think that's something that organizations tend to do. So think about your own beta, if you like, relative to what happens on the outside, and be aware of that. And I'd really be willing as an organization to worry aloud about what's changing. People are better, I always find, at sensing delta and change rather than what is and what's absolute. So, you know, are we more X than Y, you know, over a period of time? Are we better at something than we were a year ago? Have we learned, are we more political than we were a year ago? Are we embracing change more than a year ago? And be willing and dialogue about it, Aidan. Dialogue about it, Oliver. Ask those questions amongst yourselves and be really honest about it. So
I absolutely love that point. Like, you know, if you could measure the wow factor of Carmoola or your company, you know, like, could you build a process to do that? I think that's a really, really interesting point. And how do you then feed that into the board as a representation of the culture? Yeah, really love that.
Yeah. So vignettes are great, and you do that, Aidan. I remember in the Cap 1 days, and we've done this with some of our companies, is measure some kind of output. We've saved customers X amount of money, right? You know, we've enabled N number of people to get access to that they wouldn't ordinarily have. And when you start seeing some of these telephone numbers that you can impact, that on top of the vignettes, when you get really palpable, can be really powerful. So it's not just individual, it's a great benefit, but then you have how many people you avail, and you look at those ISO curves, and you can start to go, wow, you know, this thing's really making a freaking difference. Because wow is not just one person who had the most brilliant experience. It's that you have 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. So that's where it's fantastic. And the other part of it, just to finish it, is the black eye that you give to the incumbents. You know, with I remember bringing Capital One to Nottingham, and to taking on Barclays and Lloyds and NatWest, and it was the most. I was so excited to do that. There was a very senior person at one of the senior banks pulled me aside. It's very un-PC, and he said, "Nigel, you know, it's such a good time, you know, in the US, and the US is different to the UK. You know, an Englishman changes his wife more often than he changes his bank." And I went, "Oh yeah, I love that attitude. That's exactly what I want to compete against. That is just so brilliant. That's arrogant, chauvinistic, you know, old school British approach, and that's what you're out to crush. And that gets you up in the morning, or gets me up in the morning."
It's definitely can crush that in our space as well, because it reminds me of what it was like when you brought Capital One to the world. So look, Nigel, I can't thank you enough. It's been absolutely memorable, and extremely grateful for you spending the time and talking to us. So thank you so much. And yeah, really appreciate it, and have a great time in the UK. And hopefully Tottenham will win tomorrow. And thank you so much.
Pleasure, guys. Off you go. Have fun. Have a great weekend. And thanks for the conversation. I loved it. Take care, Aidan.
Thanks, Nigel. Bye. Bye.